What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing a book review on New Spring, written by Robert Jordan. So without further ado, let's dig into it. So for those of you who don't know, New Spring is the prequel book in the epic Wheel of Time saga. So there's 15 books in Wheel of Time. There's the 14 and then the prequel, which totals out to 15. And then this is the second to last book that Robert Jordan himself wrote before his passing, unfortunately. So he wrote the first 10, and then he wrote New Spring, and then he wrote Knife of Dreams, which is book 11. And that's when Brandon Sanderson picked up the reins with all of Robert Jordan's notes to complete the series with book 12, 13, and 14. And I finished book 14 at the beginning of this year, in January of 2024, and it made it the best series I've ever read. And I was hanging on to New Spring until I started missing Wheel of Time, and then I'm like, it's the last new book I can read in the series. And so I started missing Wheel of Time, and I a little bit felt like a poser or a faker for not having, like, saying I completed the series, but I didn't read the prequel. So there was a little bit of that as well, but more of it was I was missing Rand Land, as a lot of people call it, but just missing the Wheel of Time in general. So yeah, and it's much shorter too, because on average, I feel like a lot of the Wheel of Time books are like 800 to like 900. Sometimes they're 1,000 pages, and this one is just under 320 pages. So flew through this one and loved every single page. So just kind of overall thoughts. Out of 10, I rated New Spring as a 9.06 out of 10. And if you're curious how I get that score, we'll talk about that in the spoiler section. But yeah, spoiler free. This is a great book. If you are new to Wheel of Time, you're debating if you want to read the prequel first or Eye of the World. I recommend starting with Eye of the World because that, in my opinion, is like the true start of the Wheel of Time. And you could wait and finish this just like I did after you finish the 14 books. But I would maybe suggest reading this after like book 6 or 7, maybe book 8, after Moraine does her little side quest thing. If you know, you know. I forget what book that actually happens. So I would maybe do that. But anyway, the book New Spring that I'm talking about today focuses on Moraine and Lan. Those are the two POVs it jumps between. Basically, it's Moraine becoming an Aes Sedai, and then Lan. Basically, just more backstory, which is kind of unneeded, but I enjoyed every page that I got. So yeah, if you're a fan of the series, I definitely recommend reading it. And if you're like debating if you want to read Wheel of Time and you don't want to start with the Eye of the World because it's a few hundred pages or almost 1,000 pages, then yeah, I would say maybe start with New Spring, get a feel for Robert Jordan's writing or his prose. But if you're like, if you know you want to start Wheel of Time, I still recommend starting with Eye of the World. So, all right. So without further ado, there's not much more I can say without talking spoilers. So I'm jumping in the spoiler section for New Spring. So like I alluded to earlier, to get my score out of 10, there's 5 categories I like to rate, and I rate each category out of 10, and then I take an average of those 5 scores to get my overall score of the 9.06, like I said. And then the first category I like to rate is emotional impact, and I rated emotional impact as an 8.8 out of 10, and for me that's pretty high. And like I was saying, I was missing Wheel of Time, I was missing Rainland, and so part of the like it kind of felt like a homecoming a little bit, which I know kind of sounds melodramatic because, like I said, I finished that in the beginning of January, and now as of me recording this, or when I read this, it's the end of March, so it hasn't even been a full 3 months, and I'm already missing it. But it felt like a coming home, and we got to focus on characters like Moraine and Lan, and learn more about their backstory and more of their motivations. Which we didn't get to see too much in the original 14 books, right? So I was kind of emotional for that reason, but also there were a lot of like different little Easter eggs for fans of the series. Like if you read the entire series, there's little bits that you pick up. You're like, oh, hey, that character, that's cool. Like my biggest example is Elias, who is like a wolf brother and kind of teaches Perrin how to talk to wolves, and that's kind of runs with Perrin's whole storyline. And Elias, from reading, like from his conversations with Perrin that Elias used to be a warder, and so he was close with Aes Sedai and kind of knew the Aes Sedai ways. And then there's a training sequence, or like where Moraine is like walking through the halls, and it's describing like warders fighting with each other, sparring, and then there's a Aes Sedai that calls out saying, "Yeah, Elias, good job," or whatever she says. It's just like, "Hey, Elias, that's cool." So just little things like that, like if you got sharp eyes and if you're paying attention, you'll pick up on it, which I think is really cool. And there's other times where it kind of introduces new characters, which makes sense because there's hundreds of Aes Sedai, and you haven't met all of them throughout the original series. So that was kind of interesting, but then also in the back of my head too, it's like, if you're a new character, you're either going to die or you like go away and like never show up again. So it's like, what's that about? So that kind of took me out of it a little bit, because it's a prequel. So it's kind of working around these different parameters than if it was a continuation of the story, right? So a little bit wishy-washy, but overall, I really enjoyed it. Next is characters. I rated that as a 9.1, which is obviously higher than an 8.8 for emotional impact. But it's so high for me because, yes, we didn't focus on the characters we focus on for the main series, like the Edmund Fields 5, obviously. But it focuses on Moraine and Lan, which are two of my favorite characters. I'd say Lan probably more than Moraine, and unfortunately we see a lot more of Moraine, which makes sense. She's got more of that politics stuff, more of that Aes Sedai magic stuff to focus on, so it makes sense. But what we did get to see with Lan, I loved. What we get to see with Moraine, was really great, and it kind of showed a different perspective, right? Because there were hints, I'm pointing the wrong way, there were hints in the books of Moraine's relationship with Siwan, however you say her name, who was the Amarylline Seat at one point, or who becomes the Amarylline Seat before Egwene, or Egwene. I'm sorry, I suck with words. But you get to see that in New Spring. You get to see them as accepted, like pull pranks and things like that, which is kind of hinted in that. But yeah, and like just see their like how close of a friendship they really have. But then also, I remember there was a couple lines in the original series too where it's like people forget that they were such good friends, and I guess time can be a cure for that. Because at the end of the book, Siwan is at the tower, and then Moraine is out in the world hunting for the Dragon Reborn, and it seems like she's doing that for many, many years when Eye of the World starts. So kind of makes sense. But if like the existing sisters who taught the two of them as accepted know how close people they were, like that took me out of it a little bit, but I guess time does cure all, right? And then there are some new characters, like I said, that were introduced, like Bukama, flashed here, I don't know how to say that, who was one of the, I think it was 12 or 15 men that carried Lan out of Malkair as it got invaded from the Shadow, when he was still in his cradle, unfortunately. And so Lan has a very strong connection with him. He's a friend and mentor, and he taught him everything, really. How to fight, how to be a man, teaching him that duty is heavier than a mountain, but death is lighter than a feather. I love that line. And just what it is to be Malkair and what it is to be a man, like I said, just all these different things. So the relationship Lan had with him, just almost like a father-son relationship, was really strong. And when Bukama did die at the end, made me really sad. But you kind of sort of expected it, because just the time between New Spring and Eye of the World is, I think, like 20 some years. And also it's revealed in the series that Lan, like everyone he ever loved is dead pretty much. So you kind of expected it. Now for plot, this is the lowest rated thing out of the 5 at an 8.6. Still pretty high, but it's got less pages, so it's working in these weird confines of being a prequel, and you can't escape like what the groundwork is of the main series, like magic wise or politics wise, things like that. So So Robert Jordan didn't write himself in a corner, but he was kind of limited on what he could expound upon, I should say. The plot's pretty simple. It's, if you haven't read it, you should. I don't know why you're sitting here listening to spoilers. But if you have read it, you know what I'm talking about, where Moraine and Saiwan are accepted, or they start as accepted in the tower, and they are attending the Amerlin seat at the time, and then the Amerlin seat's keeper has a foretelling. One of the talents can foretell the future, and she has a foretelling, and she basically says that the Dragon Reborn was just reborn, and he was just reborn on Dragon Mount, and then she passes away, and then she faints, but then it's revealed that she actually just dies on the spot. So it's only the three people in that room, so the Amerlin seat, and then Moraine and Saiwan, are the only three that know that foretelling took place. And then it's revealed a few days later, maybe a week later, that the Amerlin seat is dead. And then so now it comes down to Moraine and Saiwan are the only two that know for a fact that what the foretelling is. Now, there's some politics, too, where the Amerlin seat, where Moraine is kind of assuming that the Amerlin seat has told some Aes Sedai to go hunt, too, but she's not sure. So, eventually, Moraine and Saiwan do get promoted to Aes Sedai, and then after they're on Aes Sedai, then they kind of go off their little paths, where Saiwan starts becoming like the main eyes and ears person for the Blue Ajah, and then Moraine is basically hunting for the Dragon Reborn. And during this time, we see Lan a little bit, just kind of see his struggles with his identity, not his identity, but the identity of Malkair people, and his single battle, or his internal battle with the Blight, he knows his destiny is to go die on the Blight in rebellion for Malkair. Go dies for his land, go die for his people. But when we are seeing Lan in this book, he's in his early 20s, which is different than obviously when we see him in the main series, which was a lot of fun. And again, seeing his relationship with Bukama and just kind of Borderlands politics, because people believe that he rose the crane of Malkair, intending to lead an army, but it turns out it wasn't him. It was his ex-first lover, which is Carnera, how I pronounce that. Again, it'll be flashed here. So that was kind of cool too. We get to see more world building especially with the Borderlands, and even with the Aes Sedai a little bit. But a lot of the Aes Sedai politics are just kind of retreaded. But yeah, anyway, so kind of a simple plot, and then eventually at the end, you can kind of assume, because in the main series, Moraine and Lan are bonded as Warder and Aes Sedai. So at the very end, you're kind of expecting it, and it's literally in the last 5 pages that Moraine bonds Lan, which was a satisfying moment. So yeah, plot 8.6. And then dialogue and prose is a 9.3, which is so high for me. I loved Robert Jordan's prose. I know a lot of people kind of call him dry sometimes because he is very descriptive in his writing, but I personally love that. It helps my inner mind, or my inner eye, be able to see exactly what's going on. It basically plays that movie in my head, which sometimes I struggle with other authors. So yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is I think Robert Jordan's prose is just masterclass. I'm never really confused about what's going on, and if I am, it's probably because I missed something or I wasn't paying attention, or sometimes I just get confused about characters. Sometimes Aes Sedai names are similar to each other, or just keeping track. Sometimes something that Robert Jordan does do sometimes that I find frustrating is when he introduced somebody, he gives their full name. So Moraine Demandred, I think, or I forget how to say her last name, but let's say it's Demandred, even though I know it's not. Sometimes he would say Moraine said this, and then someone else responds, and then Moraine says something, and then it's oh, Demandred said. So it's it kind of uses both of their names, or uses their physical features, like knowing Moraine's a blonde one, and then she's talking to a redhead. He says Moraine said something, the redhead said something, and then the blonde respond. Like, so he identifies people in different ways, which I think is clever because it keeps your mind going, trying to pay attention. Okay, this person it kind of details more things in the scene, but it's a little harder to keep up sometimes. But again, I think it's just masterclass dialogue and prose. I just love it. And then finally, world building. This is by far the highest rated thing at a 9.5 out of 10. Just the world building that Robert Jordan does, that he's crafted for this book series, is just phenomenal. Now, yes, I might be a little biased with the 9.5 out of 10, because, especially with it just being over 300 pages. But again, it is a prequel, so you should be able to read it before everything else. But I've read it after I read everything else. So in my mind, it's building off of what I already read, which is maybe unfair. But still, him being able to explain the Aes Sedai politics, how it is, like, if you're an accepted versus an Aes Sedai, and then their relationships with warders, and just their, like, Aes Sedai's relationships with different kingdoms, and being advisors to kings and queens, and all these different things. And just the magic system, how it works, how it's Sedine is not for women, and men can use it. And then Sidar, that's how I remember it. It's Regal, ends with an R, and then Sedine ends with an N, so it's not for women. Then ends with an R is Regal, which is for women. That's just how it is in my mind. So and then you can use Sidar, and then it's like you can weave with earth and fire and air and spirit and water, and like, so all these different things. And then again, like, the Borderlands politics is being expanded upon, and then when there's a few fight scenes with Lan and him going through the different forms, it's just so cool to me. And it makes so much sense, and I just love it. And it feels like the world is a living, breathing character almost, where if somebody does something and then comes back to that place, like, the actions of that consequences, like, almost cause ripples. I just love it. It just feels like a lived-in world, and I just think it's phenomenal. And yeah, if you can't tell, I just love Wheel of Time, and I highly recommend you read Wheel of Time if you haven't. So anyway, that's it for me today, guys. If you enjoyed this episode of my review of New Spring, please hit like down below. If you guys want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button as well as that bell notification icon. If you guys have any recommendations of what you want me to read and review, please throw those in the comments. I'd be more than happy to accommodate that, assuming I can get a copy. And yeah, I just appreciate you guys so much. Thank you so much for watching. It's the best way to support me as a creator, and you guys are just awesome. So thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate you, and I'll catch you in the next one.